When I was first asked to offer some remarks on this week's Torah portion, Pinchas, Numbers 25:10 to 31, the directions seemed very clear. Read the Parsha, focus on a section of personal interest that resonates with you. I fully admit that I underestimated the complexity of the task. What I came to realize is that reading a Parsha is nothing like reading a distinct chapter of a book, with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. Nor does it follow the writing structure that language arts teachers have been drilling into our children, where one states a main idea, supports that idea with 2 to 3 facts, and summarizes in the conclusion. Rather, my experience was more like one of picking up a book that I began to read, but put down for a long time. I wasn't really sure what had just happened, but it all seemed somewhat familiar, and once I got to the end, I wanted more. The Parsha begins with Pinchas killing an Israelite and Midianite woman, whose actions brought a plague upon the Israelites. A war with the Midianites ensues. Then, a census is taken both to determine how many men over the age of 20 are available for battle, as well as to determine the apportionment of land when the Israelites will enter the promised land after roaming the desert. Allotment of land also provides impetus to the daughters of Zelophehad to speak up and force a change in the laws of property inheritance. Moses is informed by God that he will see the promised land, but not enter it. Thus, Joshua is chosen to be Moses' successor. Finally, there is a long, detailed recitation of the sacrificial rituals for all festival occasions. Wow, that's a lot to take in. After reading the Parsha, I felt a bit like a kid in the candy shop or trying to pick only one book from the bookstore. So much of what I read resonated with me, and I'm constantly surprised to see how there is always something new to learn from this ancient text that serves as a guidepost for us and retains relevance even today. In reading about Pinchas, who is characterized as a zealot, I think of our current political climate, where partisan politics have taken front stage, and our elected officials reach across the aisle less and less to find common ground, seemingly secure in the knowledge that their position is the right one. The qualifications for the census reminded me of the year I just spent revisiting early American history with our sons, Gabriel and Alexander, as they learned about the birth of our nation and the policies around slavery and women's rights that shaped our nation. Who is eligible to vote? Who can be counted? In current times, barely a week goes by without a mention of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, either in the newspaper or via email blast from within my firm. And in a year that has left me and my sister mourning the loss of our own father, I empathize with the pleas of Mala, Noah, Hogla, Milcha, and Tirza, daughters of Zelophehad. These women spoke out to claim what was rightfully theirs based on their lineage rather than their gender. Counting and measurement are two themes that appear many times in the Torah. It's one we continually grapple with as we navigate the complexities of living in our modern world. Who is counted? For what purpose? And by what measure? In an essay by Rabbi Lee Beisel notes that questions of inclusiveness and human dignity, uplifting all human beings, continue to challenge us today. The usage of the word uplifting is particularly relevant when one considers the Hebrew word for census means lift the head. Therefore, the census takes on a greater meaning than simply to count, but to lift and acknowledge everyone. As I began to prepare my remarks for this evening a few weeks ago, the world was gripped by the story of a missing submersible named the Titan, with 5 passengers aboard for a recreational dive to observe the ocean's remnants of the Titanic. The passengers were all there of their own volition, seeking a once-in-a-lifetime experience. When the Titan went missing, multiple nations mobilized resources to find the missing vessel, and the world was transfixed by their story. Meanwhile, thousands of miles across the ocean in the Mediterranean Sea, a fishing vessel named Adriana set sail with 750 passengers. The passengers were migrants, leaving their homes in search of a new life. This was an opportunity to start again, with hopes and dreams of reuniting with their families one day. When Adriana capsized, there was no international response. Rather, a Coast Guard call to a nearby ship, which happened to be a super luxury yacht named the Mayan Queen, that rescued the 100 survivors from the wreck. A recent New York Times article noted that the news was saturated with reports about the missing submersible, but the capsized boat of migrants barely registered on most people's radars. 2 vessels, both lost at sea, both with tragic loss of life. 2 vessels, one named Titan, which means a person or thing of very great strength, intellect, or importance. The other named Adriana, meaning descended from royalty. The dichotomy between these 2 stories is striking, the outcome for both heartbreaking. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes in The Dignity of Difference, a world in which the few prosper and many starve offends our deepest sense of fairness and human solidarity. Disparities of this magnitude, vast, concentrated wealth along widespread suffering, is intolerable. I admit, I was one of the people transfixed by the news coverage of the Titan. I repeatedly hit refresh on my browser to see what the latest update was on the search for the missing vessel. I, like many in this room, I suspect, fall victim to being swayed by the top stories as presented to us by the media. And yet, there are moments of humanity that pierce through the noise and grab our attention. I'd like to think that we did what anyone would do, said Captain Richard Kirby of the Mayan Queen. Captain Kirby heard the call and lifted up those 100 survivors, reaffirming that everyone is counted and everyone matters. In my work as an architect, the idea of creating open and accessible spaces is embedded in the work that I do. It is our highest aspiration that the places we create reflect a diversity of viewpoints and allows them to be physically and culturally accessible to all. For me, reading Pinkless has broken through the cacophony of everyday life and opened a door for personal reflection about equality, not only as an architect, but as a woman and a member of the Jewish community. As we settle into the lazy days of summer, a break from routine is the perfect opportunity to move at a slower pace, be mindful of the world around us, and heed the call to lift our voices. Self-awareness and acknowledging the plight of others is the first step in lifting and acknowledging others to create a society that is more open and equal for all. I would like to take one moment to extend my heartfelt sympathy to Rabbi Bacon and the entire Bacon family. I had the privilege of working with Rabbi Bacon on these remarks, and her offering of the translation for the Hebrew word for census is what gave structure to my thoughts, and I'm thankful for her insights. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.